I am 63. Last month, my son Ethan brought over a 1978 Ford Bronco he had just bought from an estate sale. The body was immaculate, but the electrical system was a mess. He had already installed a heavy-duty alternator and dropped a massive, expensive new battery under the hood. But when he turned the key, the headlights would barely flicker, and the starter just made a weak, hollow clicking sound. He was frustrated, talking about tearing the whole engine block apart to find the problem. A neighbor of mine who restores classic cars walked over, took one look, and told Ethan to leave the engine alone. He reached down near the firewall and pulled out 3 old frayed ground wires. The copper inside was completely green and corroded. My neighbor swapped those 3 cheap wires for new ones, told Ethan to try again, and the truck roared to life on the first turn. The power had always been there in the battery. The system just lacked the physical pathways to deliver the current. Looking at those 3 corroded wires sitting on the concrete of my driveway, I felt a strange knot in my stomach. Because looking at that broken electrical circuit was exactly like looking back at my own body in my late 50s. For most of my adult life, I treated my internal biology like an account I could just endlessly withdraw from. I spent my career in corporate sales, running regions, living out of a suitcase, and surviving on a combination of sheer willpower and room service. I operated under the assumption that if I just demanded performance from my body would have no choice but to comply. I thought the engine was indestructible simply because it had never failed me before. But biology does not care about your work ethic. It runs on a physical infrastructure. And when that infrastructure begins to fray and corrode from years of silent neglect, willpower means absolutely nothing. When I hit 55, the current inside my own body started to drop. It was not a sudden power failure. It was a slow, quiet dimming of the lights. I would wake up in the morning feeling like I had a heavy wool blanket draped over my shoulders. By the time I finished my afternoon meetings, my brain felt like it was operating underwater. But the most devastating part, the part that actually broke my confidence, happened in the bedroom. The physical response that a man relies on to feel vital, the automatic surge of blood and energy that makes intimacy possible, became weak. And then it became an absolute guessing game. When the machinery stops responding to your intentions, the silence that follows is deafening. You do not just lose a physical function. You lose the quiet, unspoken authority you walk around with. You start feeling like an imposter in your own life. I handled that physical failure the way generations of men are taught to handle it. I buried it. I started engineering my entire evening routine to avoid my wife at the time. I would find an excuse to stay in the garage organizing tools that were already organized, or I would sit in my home office staring at a blank computer screen until I knew she was asleep. I convinced myself I was just giving us both space. But the truth was, I was terrified. I was terrified of initiating anything because I knew the signal from my brain was no longer reaching the rest of my body. The emotional distance that builds up in a house when a man refuses to speak about his failing body is incredibly destructive. It creates a cold, heavy atmosphere that slowly suffocates the relationship. You think you are protecting your pride by staying quiet, but you are actually just leaving your partner in the dark, wondering what they did wrong. The divorce that eventually came was the result of many fractured things, but my absolute refusal to look under the hood and fix the broken connections was the fatal blow. Living alone in an apartment a couple of years later, I finally hit a wall. I was tired of feeling like a ghost. I decided I was going to fix the engine. I did not go to a doctor for a synthetic prescription. I knew how those pills worked. They force the system to act for a few hours by artificially manipulating blood pressure, but they do not repair the actual infrastructure. I wanted to fix the wiring, so I went online. I read every Men's Health forum and watched every video I could find. And the internet told me the exact same thing across the board. They told me I needed zinc. They called it the master mineral for male performance, the ultimate fuel for testosterone and vitality. So I bought the most expensive, highly absorbable zinc supplement on the market. I took massive doses of it every single day. I waited for the power to return. I waited for the lights to come back on. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. The heavy fatigue was still there. The coldness in my extremities was still there. The lack of morning response was entirely unchanged. I was furious. I felt completely betrayed by my own biology. I was pouring the supposedly perfect fuel into the tank, and the engine was still dead. It took me another 4 months of intense, quiet research to finally understand why. What I discovered completely rewrote my understanding of how a man's body ages. I realized that my problem was not a lack of raw power. My problem was a broken delivery system. Taking massive doses of zinc was exactly like my son dropping that huge, expensive battery into a truck with corroded wires. The raw material was there, but it had no way to travel through the system. I learned that as we age under stress and poor sleep, two specific mechanical failures happen in the body. First, calcium gets pulled out of our bones and starts getting dumped into our bloodstream, where it hardens the walls of our blood vessels. The pipes become rigid. They cannot expand to let blood flow. Second, the myelin sheath, the actual physical insulation around our nervous system, starts to degrade. The electrical signals from the brain telling the body to perform literally get lost in transit. I did not need more zinc. I needed to clear the pipes and repair the wiring. I found the answer in a specific combination of three ordinary foundational vitamins that work together like a mechanical repair crew. It was not a complex, exotic formula. It was vitamin D3, vitamin K2, and a highly active form of vitamin B12. When I looked at the mechanics of what these three things do together, it made perfect structural sense. Vitamin D3 acts as the foreman, pulling the necessary resources into the bloodstream. But vitamin K2 is the actual traffic cop. It takes the calcium that is hardening your blood vessels and actively forces it out of the soft tissue and back into the bones. It clears the resistance out of the pipes so they can become flexible and widen again. And the vitamin B12 acts as the electrician. It actively rebuilds the protective insulation around your nerve endings so the command signals from your brain can actually reach their destination without short-circuiting. I decided to stop the zinc entirely and run a test on the infrastructure. The next morning, I changed my routine. I made a couple of eggs because D3 and K2 need dietary fat to absorb properly, and I swallowed those three vitamins. D3, K2, and B12. I did not feel a sudden rush of adrenaline. I did not feel a chemical high. This is a structural rebuild, not a stimulant. I just kept doing it every single morning. 2 eggs, 3 vitamins. Swallow. Move on with my day. About 3 weeks into this new protocol, I was walking out of a hardware store carrying 2 heavy buckets of pain. Normally, that kind of dead weight would make my shoulders burn and my breathing turn shallow before I even reached the truck. Halfway across the parking lot, I realized my grip was solid. My chest was not tight. The deep, hollow fatigue that I thought was just a permanent part of being in my 60s was absent. The current was flowing smoothly without resistance. And then, about 10 days after that, the absolute proof arrived. I woke up on a Thursday morning, the room was still dark, and the system was fully online. The baseline physical response, the unforced, undeniable sign that a man's internal wiring is connected and functioning, was there. It was not a faint, weak signal, it was holding steady pressure. The command was finally reaching the destination. I lay there staring at the ceiling, and I felt a wave of intense, bitter anger. I was angry that I had lost years of my life, isolated myself from a marriage, and lived with a quiet, consuming shame, all because I was trying to shove more fuel into a system that simply had broken wiring. I had surrendered my confidence for a mechanical failure that could be fixed with 3 basic vitamins. But that anger evaporated quickly, and what rushed in to replace it was a profound, quiet relief. I was not a hollowed-out shell. The battery was fine. I just needed to replace the ground wires. My life now is built on an entirely different foundation. I am married to Alyssa now. She is a woman who communicates directly and expects the same from me. When you share a life with someone who actually pays attention, you have to be able to meet them in the moment. You have to have the physical and emotional bandwidth to stand your ground. And when your body actually translates your intentions into physical reality, the background anxiety of your life disappears. You stop dreading the end of the night. You stop avoiding affection. You just exist in your own skin with a steady, quiet capability. I still take those exact same 3 vitamins every single morning. D3, K2, and B12. I take them with my breakfast. I do not miss a day. I do it because I understand what they are actively doing inside the walls of my arteries and along the length of my nerves. They are keeping the pipes clear and the wiring insulated. I am not sitting here telling you that swallowing 3 vitamins is going to undo 20 years of self-destruction. If you are drinking heavily every night, eating processed garbage out of a wrapper, and sleeping 3 hours at a time, your system is going to fail, and no vitamin on earth will stop it. You still have to act like a man who wants to survive. You have to move heavy things, manage your stress, and respect your sleep. But I am telling you this. Many of you are sitting in the dark right now, looking at the floor, thinking that your time as a fully responsive man is behind you. You are sleeping on the far edge of the mattress, avoiding the person you love because you think the machinery is permanently broken. You think you are out of power. You are likely not out of power. You probably just have corroded wiring and restricted lines. You do not have to accept the fatigue and the physical silence as your permanent reality. If you are over 50, understanding the infrastructure of your own body is the only way you get to keep your pride. Start looking at the actual mechanics of how your system delivers the signal. Consider what happens when you finally clear the resistance out of the pipes and repair the electrical lines. The engine wants to run. The power is still there. Sometimes you just have to stop forcing the wrong solution, fix the physical connections, and let the current flow back to where it belongs.